Is this a paid Panera Sip Club endorsement?
You too for $12.99.
He just filled it up from over on the side. That was a
this is a budget hack. If you're just in a place where you can't afford your Starbucks or your Panera coffee, go once at the beginning of the month, get a cup, and just refill it at home, and you can trick yourself into thinking you're drinking Starbucks.
Isn't that? Welcome to the Gathering I screwed it up already.
Well, you missed a couple podcasts, so you can't even do the intro.
Welcome to the Gathering Greenhouse, a podcast to help us grow together.
Welcome to the Gathering Podcast, a greenhouse where we grow things. What's really funny about this is never once have we actually done this in a greenhouse.
Right.
That'd be cool to do. It would be hot.
It may not be too hot, but it'd be very humid and
gross.
I don't know about you, but I do not like humid. Is probably, I don't know if humid or like cold rain is my least favorite type of weather. Do you consider humid a weather type?
Yeah, I mean it's a weather condition, right? So it's definitely the worst.
Okay. Missouri, I'm guessing, has a lot of humidity problems.
Very humid,
yeah.
Way more humid than here. So of all the places I've lived, Central Florida, Missouri, and Ohio, Central Florida is definitely the worst.
Most humid.
But you kind of get used to it when you're down there. And then the other thing about down there is people just crank their AC. Right. So like it's miserable outside, but you go inside and it's nice. Missouri was just, we have a lot of lakes, and so it was not fun in the summer. Yeah. Up here it's not too bad. Every once in a while, a couple days.
So I have a follow-up question from your sermon.
Yes. From 2 weeks ago?
This is just an interesting, I was just curious.
All right.
And that is, in your sermon, you talked about the documentary on Netflix, and you said you only made it like halfway through before you couldn't watch anymore. Did you go back and finish it?
No.
Okay.
No.
I started watching. I was like, oh, this. I remember when that went through because that was a really big deal.
It was a big news story, and no.
What did you think of the documentary? Did you? So it was like it was strange to me where it was like, I think I got it after they started doing it because they were like, weather chasers, but they were really just like rednecks who liked to get into trouble or whatever.
I kept having this thought watching it, which was I think they did a really good job making you feel how dramatic that was, like how intense it was and all that stuff. But you couldn't get like better people to be on the documentary. And like I'm not going to say who, but like I knew one of the people in did a couple of church events with that person. Yeah. And it's definitely not who you would think would do church events.
Right.
In that documentary, but I knew them, and I think I know
who you're talking about.
Yeah.
He seemed like a interesting guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Anyway, he so I'm watching this, I'm like, you guys couldn't find anybody better for this documentary. They picked rednecks and just like, I don't know. Could you get like an actual grown up to tell the story?
That's what I wonder. Like, why didn't they have someone who like
well spoken?
Yeah. Why didn't they have someone like that? Like because I liked that it was like a firsthand perspective of people who actually live there. But you could have mixed in some
for sure.
Is this a paid Panera Sip Club endorsement?
You too for $12.99.
He just filled it up from over on the side. That was a
this is a budget hack. If you're just in a place where you can't afford your Starbucks or your Panera coffee, go once at the beginning of the month, get a cup, and just refill it at home, and you can trick yourself into thinking you're drinking Starbucks.
Isn't that what? Okay. A person who doesn't work here anymore, who we always used to be like, why does he like? Are you getting?
As soon as I was saying that, I was like, I feel like I've heard this before.
Yeah, I know.
But they were serious.
Yes. Yeah. But I'm noticing. I mean, we can't pan over here, but our coffee area is looking quite nice. I mean, we have the nicest looking Keurig I've ever seen.
It's a very fancy Keurig.
It is very fancy. And it doesn't just do one cup. It you could do a whole pot. I didn't even know that
in case you were
existed.
wondering where your more than able dollars were going.
Yeah, but Keurigs are not that expensive, you know.
No. And we needed a new coffee maker for the new office spot.
Right.
So,
and if I know anything about the way we purchase things, it was probably an Amazon return that
we
got at the warehouse deal on.
A bit FTA,
or a warehouse deal, or someone donated it to us.
Yeah, but anyway, back to the tornado thing. I just that was my general thought. Was like they did a really good job making you feel the emotion of how big it was, and setting that up before the storm took place in the in the film. But then I was like, can we just less talking, less can we do less cutaways to the interviews and
So what part was emotional to you? Like when that tornado started coming?
So for me, I wasn't I actually wasn't in Joplin when it happened.
Yeah,
I was on my way to Dallas, Texas, for my senior trip.
Yeah.
And we were on the phone and we heard some storms. And I remember one girl was on the phone and then it just cut out. And she kind of got worried, but it wasn't weird for a storm to interrupt cell service there. And so no one really thought anything of it. And we get to the hotel in Dallas and we're walking in.
Yeah.
And we're checking in and we all go over to this like other area where they had the TV on. And I remember someone goes, "Hey, look, it's Joplin." And we were like all excited because Joplin, nobody knows where Joplin is.
Right.
And we walk in and we're like, "That's amazing." We're like excited. And then it like hits us and we start seeing these images of.
Yeah.
And so for me, it wasn't the storm. I didn't experience the storm. For me, what was emotional was in the days and weeks following the storm.
Yeah.
As I was really involved with my church at the time was where Samaritan's Purse headquarters was. And so we were very involved with them, just going through the houses and the rubble and the cleanup and seeing people lose just everything. That side of it was just, it weighs on you. Seeing people experience that much loss. And so when I was watching the film, some of the images of the destruction and as the storm was happening, hearing the stories and stuff like that, having heard a lot of those stories firsthand, seeing a lot of the destruction firsthand, like it wasn't like I was like having like a PTSD or anything.
It wasn't like that.
It was more though. It just was like weighing on me so heavy. I was like, this is not enjoyable to watch. I don't want to watch this before I go to bed. You know. So we flipped on a sitcom we've been watching and. Like, that's pleasant, and I can sleep better with that. But
Okay. So we can tie that right into the story of Ruth and Boaz here.
Also, can we just comment on how fun it is to say Boaz? You kind of have to hit that first syllable hard, and then Boaz.
Do you think people called him? It was his like shortened name, Bo or Az?
I really hope it was Bo.
Okay.
Like I could see Az getting a little inappropriate real fast. Okay. I'm not gonna demonstrate it, even though I'm tempted to.
Okay. Moving on.
Steve's back on the podcast and I'm saying stupid stuff.
Okay. So here's how I'm tying this in together, right? Yeah. So she is Ruth, right? So she happened into Boaz's field, okay?
Yeah.
And it says God's providence feels like a coincidence. So for you were in Dallas when the tornado went through. Did that in any sense feel like it could have been God's providence that you were there? And did it feel like maybe it just was a coincidence? Or could it be both?
Not really. So I don't know. I've never really thought about that. My family, where we lived, wasn't impacted by the tornado. We were far enough out of the path.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody I was with, they lost their home or anything like that. So I don't know, I don't want to be like, oh, if I had been had been home, something bad would so I don't think that. I do think there was a lot of providential stories I heard.
Yeah.
There, like people who crazy things like my dog bit my shirt and dragged me down into the basement. And there's a lot of stories of kids seeing what is, when they describe it, sounded like angelic beings warning the children to get inside. And then there's stuff like that you hear. And to me, there's no way that it can't be God. A storm that size, we were expecting the death toll and the injury toll to be, incredible, pushing 1,000, and
Right.
and I believe at the end of the day, it ended up being under 200 people.
Wow. But that's still a huge
it's a huge number
compared to what tornadoes and things like that usually
right.
are. Like,
and people with that tornado don't understand. I mean, this tornado was like a mile wide.
Right.
This wasn't like a twister you see in a farm field. This was a massive storm. And it was just went straight through the town. You could see the path. And so, something that magnitude, I think there was lots of moments of providence and God working, and some of the stories I've heard, even things with like Joplin after the storm had an economic boom that actually really helped the town recover. Like there's little things like that happen throughout that whole story that you're like, hey, God was actually doing something in this. For me personally, I don't know that I ever have thought like, oh, how lucky am I that,
Yes.
God moved me there. I think it was, really one other thing that was really cool was another ministry organization I was involved with. We had been partnering with, it's funny, it's in Dallas, but that's not why I was there. We were in Dallas working with this church that hosted a warehouse that basically just served the community. And they were like, we should do this in Joplin. And they were already putting that together.
Right.
And then when the storm happened, we had everything in place to, we just got a warehouse and basically opened a free store for people to just get whatever they needed. And I think that was definitely providential that all that was in place and ready to go.
So I think this ties into, my perspective on, perspective and providence.
Yeah.
Is it, that like sometimes I feel God's providence more in relationships that I have and conversations that I have where God put the right person in my life at the right time. And that's not a coincidence that happens. That's, following God's plan for you in your life, that providence happens through those of like, if you have people, if you're working on having good people in your life, then when life takes a twist and turn, you are prepared to listen to God's providence for you.
So often we're like, God doesn't talk to me because we're like thinking God has to like the clouds have to separate and the voice of heaven comes down, or we'll think God only works with these big visible miracles and stuff. But the reality is, in my life, most of the times that I've seen God speak to me, God has worked something out for me. It's been through other people.
Yes,
and we all have these, and that's what you were getting at is like providential moments, right? Where I've had several in my life where I sat down with somebody who maybe didn't know what I was going through or whatever, and they just gave me the piece of encouragement I needed or the advice that I wasn't even seeking out. But it's what I needed in that moment. They had no idea.
Right.
I had no idea that it would come through that person, but God knew, right? And often that's how God meets our needs. Hey, God, I need this. I mean, in ministry, how many times have you gotten a gift card or a little extra something in your mail, no name on it, but it's someone from the church, and you had that extra bill that month. It happens over and over again, and that's not, we wouldn't be like, oh, look at God just, sent manna from heaven.
Yes.
But he did send that person at that time you needed it. And, that gets into why though, like you want to see God work in your life, you can't isolate yourself from God's people.
Absolutely. I think that's the big takeaway. Is exactly what you said. And then when we see in the story of Ruth chapter 2, which is what we're talking about and David talked about on Sunday, is it how did God show up to Ruth in that time? And it was through Boaz. Right. And it was Boaz's words that was the thing that David specifically spoke on. Was Boaz was speaking truth into her life and encouraging her. So God was essentially using Boaz to encourage Ruth. Right.
For sure.
In that story, and David hit on that, and I think that is what is God's providence. the majority of the time. You know, there are some times where there's like big life events that happen and God shows up in a big way. But most of the time, it's talking to the right person. It's or for us, it's being there for someone when they're hurting, or someone just looking to encourage when, you know, hey, like when you just see an opportunity, or you see someone who might need it, or someone who's figuring life out, like they're a younger Christian, or they're just a younger person.
And this is where it gets to. There's a two-sidedness to this, right? The first is to be receptive to those things and let God work through people in your life, right? Yeah. So when somebody wants to bless you, I would say when someone, never say no to a blessing. Yeah. If somebody wants to bless you, I choose to trust that that's God working in them to do something, and I actually get to bless them by allowing them to bless me, right? So if someone wants to bless you, let them bless you. If someone wants to encourage you, let them encourage you. Yeah. Receive it, because it's very likely God pushing them to do that, right? Yeah. And leading them to do that. But the other side of that is when you feel the need to encourage somebody, do it. Yeah. When you feel like God's telling you to bless somebody, do it, because that is God using you. Yes. And so often I think this, a few months ago, I actually felt like God was telling me I needed to go say something to somebody, and I didn't. Yes. Right. I was like, it's going to be so awkward. I've never really talked to this person, and I regret that, right? Because I'm like, I know God was actually telling me to, and I didn't let God use me in that moment. And so I think you should do that, right? Yeah. When you feel like God is telling you to encourage. Now, don't be a wild person and be weird. Some of y'all are just encouragers in general, right? And so don't just always assume it's God, right? Sometimes you might just want to say something, but in general, for most of us, I think we don't do what we're supposed to do more than we overdo things, if that makes sense.
Yep. And I want to add to what you just said, and I think that this is easier for some people than others.
For sure.
But like you said, some people are encouragers, but also so much of our communication as people is nonverbal, right? In the tone that you say it, in your body language, saying something that's like, why did they say that, or why did they share that with me?
Steve, I really want to encourage you right now. Right. You're doing a great job.
So I'd be like, John, thank you so much for that encouragement, but I'm picking up kind of an angry tone.
Are you being
could
passive?
You tell me? Could you tell me a little bit more? Just trying not to get caught up in the rhythm of life, which is very easy to do when you're busy or you have stuff going on. You just kind of go through life. Yeah. Try to be more aware of the subtleties of how people are communicating, so that you can be prepared when God gives you an opportunity to be providence in someone's life.
I like and this is where I think David mentioned presence, provision, and protection, right? Yeah. There are times where what we're talking about is a little bit provision, but really one of the best things is just your presence. And sometimes it's just like, I don't know why, but God's put on my heart to maintain a close relationship with this person, to just be involved in their life. And you may not know why. Right. And then one day that person comes to you and says, hey, I need to talk to you about this. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's why God led me to be present with them, so that I could provide something for them in this moment. And I think that's one of those things too. It's those relationships in your life, just always be watching, stay close, so that when something does happen or somebody is willing to talk, you're able to be used by God in that moment.
Yeah. And I think that's to me, as far as care is concerned, caring for someone when they're hurting or going through something difficult. I don't know about you, but I often feel like I don't have the words to say, or I feel awkward, or I don't know what it is. But presence is the number one thing they need. People generally don't need your words when they're going through something really bad. They just want to know that you're there for them.
Yeah, exactly. It's unlikely that you are probably going to tell them something they don't know, right?
And they may not be receptive to it at that point anyway.
But there is something powerful about them knowing that you're there and that your presence isn't dependent upon what they may share or not share, or whatever. Like that is that in itself is a blessing often to people, to know that they in a sense belong somewhere. So
also we had a lot of child dedications on Sunday. And I was wondering how David was going to get to his application points, because I'm like looking at my watch and I'm like, man, he's getting close to the end.
Right.
He did end up going over, which is fine, but I thought his he did a good job with a limited amount of time of bringing it back around to them. Could you say again? You remembered his 3 action points, right? What was it?
Presence, provision, protection.
Were those the 3 that he summed up at the end with?
I believe so.
Yeah.
So he really was talking about, the way Boaz interacted with Ruth.
Yeah.
He was present with her.
Yes.
He provided for her and he protected her.
Yeah.
And then kind of how that is how Christ, he's a Christ figure in the story.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Okay. So the next thing I have on here is, so Boaz blessed his workers, and David said, kindness is a leadership skill.
Yeah.
And I think so often in the workplace, we often see people as what they can do, not as a person who has their own baggage that they're bringing into it. So how do you see kindness as a leadership skill?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So I think when you're leading, and a lot of us talk in the workplace, we're talking about a boss.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Or it could be your direct report or whoever, right? But I think boss would be the same kind of.
And the reality is not every boss is a leader. Some bosses are like, we just manage stuff and nothing moves forward.
Yeah.
But if you are trying to take people someplace, understand that if you're trying to move them from one place to another and you're trying to lead them in that, you're asking something to change, you're asking something to move and to shift and to grow. And just in that alone is going to be the potential for some conflicts, potential for some things to just not be worked out. If I'm asking somebody who's done the same thing for 20 years to pivot and do something new, that's not going to be something that's just easy to always do. Kindness is when those things aren't just working the way I want them to, or someone's not able to do what I needed them to do, or change at the speed I thought they could, or whatever it is. Yeah. Kindness is the thing that in those places smooths out those rough edges. Kindness is often sacrificial, right? For me to do the thing that's kind to you may mean that I have to pick up the slack in another area while you're figuring that out. Yeah. Kindness may look like actually having a hard conversation, which, hey, I don't think this is working out, but I'm going to do this graciously and kind and all that in that conversation. But I think really what it is a leader's ability to sense a situation and know the difference of, I need to push here, or I need to not push so much so that I can maintain relationship. Yeah. And not keep people happy. That's not the right framework. Right. But maintain good, healthy relationship, connected relationship. Yeah. Where they don't feel that they don't matter. For a leader, his people matter, right? And I think kindness is just that constant reminder in those projects, in those things. Yeah. That they're people and they matter too, and their lives matter too, their families matter too.
That's a tricky thing to do.
It's hard. Yeah.
So if you
lean too far that way, you get nothing done.
You get nothing done. Yeah. Or just there can be a lot of miscommunication there. And the way that you receive kindness or receive kindness is not always the same way someone else does. So you also have to. I think one of the best leadership skills that I'm not always good at, but try to be, is assume the best in others. Right. And that's a really hard thing to do, and I don't think that's something that is necessarily taught to you on your first job that you go into. Well, it's maybe a leadership skill you have to go out of your way to get.
Yeah, and for like us, we work out at church where our working relationships and values and stuff are like built out of our faith and out of biblical principles and all that stuff. That's weird, right? Like most people's work, it's the bottom line is efficiency, right? And in those values are not going to be things like, why do we tolerate each other? Why do we assume the best? And it's, love others the way Christ has loved us, right?
Yeah.
That's part of it. There's like this underlying truth and this foundation. You're not going to get that at your first job out of college at, data entry for Reynolds or whatever you're doing, people aren't going to assume the best of you.
Right.
The culture may not be built that way. And while that's good advice for you to practice, the reality is your workplace may not have that as a value. And that's a really cool opportunity though for you to be different and to stand out and to represent Jesus really well in a place like that.
Yeah. How do you think that the attitude that you have affects your ability to assume the best in someone or use kindness as a leadership skill, or how do you think the attitude that you have, because that's one thing you can't control is your attitude.
Yeah. If I am rooted and centered around what Christ did for me, and if I can see myself the way God sees me, I can see others how God sees them. And I let that determine what my attitude is.
Yeah.
Can
you say that again? Because I think that was really powerful.
So let me see if I can.
Yeah.
When you live a Christ-centered life, and you center your life upon realizing what Christ did for you, realizing how God sees you, and how He sees others around you, you can begin to see them the same way.
Yeah.
And when I let that determine my attitude, and I go into a situation not motivated by what's best for me or what I might want, but rather how do I represent Christ well to the people He loves?
Yeah.
It's a lot easier in those prickly moments. To say, in a sense, I'm going to die to myself in this moment. I'm not going to get what I want. But I'm going to, even though I'm not getting what I want, still represent Jesus the best I can. In that moment. And that's an attitude decision you made well before a situation, right? Often we let our attitude be our attitude is reactive to our situations, but we need to approach the situation with the right attitude.
Yes.
And so it's like be proactive in choosing the right attitude before the thing is going to happen that's going to push you into a bad mood.
I know I can tend to be a little bit of a worrier at times, and I think that another piece of that is control the things that you can control, right? So don't think of like all the negative things that could happen into the future. Try to stay in the present and say, right now, I'm just going to choose to have a good attitude about the things that are in front of me. Which
this is the reoccurring theme through Ruth. Like last week, I talked about you can't control what happens to you. You can control how you respond. I think David's big point this week was God has given you what you need for now. Don't worry about the rest. And this is all in this context of Ruth, right? We read the story of Ruth well after that happened. We know how God worked it out. We know how God used Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, even thousands and thousands of years later to have an impact, right? We see the big picture. In the story, Ruth has no idea that there's anything bigger for her down the road. She is in the moment living, right? Boaz has no idea what God has in store for him down the road, but he is in the moment being faithful and doing what and living the way God would want him to live. And I think that's the thing for us to remember is we look at stories like Ruth and we're like, man, I want God to use me big.
Right.
Ruth had no idea. Like Ruth died not knowing that David would be her great grandson. Right. And that ultimately Jesus would be in her line. Right. That didn't change the faithfulness. And so for us, it's just that daily remember to be in the present, to live faithful now with what God has given us, with where He's placed us, with the things that He has placed in front of us to deal with and to go through and to endure, trusting that He's working something bigger out, and we may never see it, and that's okay.
So and I think what you said, absolutely true. It's hard to focus on that when it's something so distant into the future. And I think that along with it, that we have to, as you get further along in the Christian life or as you become a Christian, you have to say, well, sometimes we may think, oh, life is going to become easier if I start doing the right things. That is not true, right?
Not at all. So here's the thing.
Yeah.
Some things might get easier.
Yeah.
Right? If I am in a situation where my bad words and the things I say about other people cause relational strife and all that stuff, and I choose to speak the way God would have me speak, and I stop that might alleviate that stressful part of my life.
Yeah.
You know, all of a sudden, oh man, I'm able to maintain friendships. All of a sudden, people aren't hating me all the time, right? So there will be improvement in your life, and things do get better. They don't get easier.
Yes.
And that's the thing, because it's actually harder to do. If I've struggled with gossip, it's harder to not gossip than to gossip. My inner self wants to do that. You know, and so, but it's better. Yeah. Now we know that following Jesus is not easy. And you are going to run up against things in your life where the world says do it this way, your flesh says do it this way, but the Holy Spirit says no, do it this way.
Right.
And that's a hard thing to do. And often those decisions to follow and trust, we have to just do because we know it's what God wants us to do, not knowing if there's better or a blessing or something on the other side of that, right? You know, but that's the beautiful thing about faith is my faith allows me to do the right thing in a hard situation, trusting that God has a better thing and a good thing that he is working out, even if it means I endure something hard for that moment. You know, and that's what you have to lean into. You know, yeah. If life was all about having the best experience and things being happy or things always being good, I mean, we would just always just do what's selfish and always just do what serves ourselves. And
So I think to sum up this you know, this conversation, this time together, is that not only do we need to be looking for God's providence,
right?
And you know, sometimes that looks like coincidence, like David said, is
right.
Be aware and be looking for God's providence in your life. You're not going to see it if you're not looking for it, right? So be aware, be looking, be vigilant, but also be looking to be God's providence in other people's lives. And sometimes when you look to be God's providence in other people's lives, God shows providence in your life, right? You sometimes get what you give in this situation.
And if you're wondering whether or not you are like supposed to bless somebody or whatever, you are. So like, even if you're not like, if there's an opportunity in front of you to bless somebody, I would say just do it, because it's better to bless somebody extra than to, you know, be paralyzed by, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to or not. You know, be a blessing. I was always told by a youth pastor when I was growing up, you're blessed to bless.
You're blessed to bless.
And so if you're blessed, bless others. And that's, I think, just a great way to live your life.
And so look for ways and look for opportunities to be a blessing. And that's it doesn't always have to be blessing with things, you know, blessing with words, blessing with actions, blessing with just being there for somebody. And in the you know, story that David focused on with Boaz, it was just words.
Right.
It was words that he said, but sometimes those are extremely powerful and the right thing at the right time.
I was like reading that story. I was like, if Boaz is interested in Ruth, why didn't he just like set her up? You know, why didn't he just, you know, he still let her do the work and still had her, you know, take care of her. Like he didn't come in flashy and being like, oh, I'll take care of all your problems.
Yeah.
But he did provide for her through that and was present and get, you know, and I think that's a really cool thing about that story.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for spending some time with us. Until we see you again, keep it real, keep it rooted, and we will catch you next time.